The rise and fall of the Iberian Union are a fascinating chapter in the history of Spain and Portugal, marked by intricate political maneuvering, dynastic struggles, and the clash of empires. It spans from 1580 to 1640 and significantly shaped the geopolitical landscape of the Iberian Peninsula and beyond. In 1554, the heir to the Portuguese throne, Prince João Manuel, and his wife, Joanna of Austria, conceived a son, soon called the Desired, as his birth would secure the dynasty of Avis on the throne of Portugal. Unfortunately, João Manuel suffered the same fate as his brothers, dying less than 20 days before the birth of his son, baptized Sebastião. Thus, the expectation that the future king would produce seeds was very high. However, as a young man, Sebastião, who had inherited the throne at the age of 14, took a vow of chastity, which aroused concern about the future of the monarchy. The famous Battle of Alcácer Quibir in 1578, which resulted in the early death of the young Portuguese king, foretold the end of the Avis dynasty. The successor, his uncle Cardinal Henrique of Portugal, was 70 years old at the time, and his death, on January 31, 1580, was followed by a succession crisis due to the three grandchildren of the past King Manuel I claiming the throne: Catarina, Infanta of Portugal, Duchess of Bragança; Antonio, Prior of Crato; and King Philip II of Spain. The majority of members of the Council of Governors of the Kingdom of Portugal supported Felipe. After leaving for Spain, they declare him Henry's legal successor. Faced with the lack of a clear decision on the succession, the two main suitors took action. The first move was made by Philip II, whose Castilian forces entered Alentejo on February 16th, taking several squares without resistance. Antonio, the Prior of Crato, achieved growing support from the people, mobilizing patriotic sentiment and the refusal to accept a foreign monarch in his favor. On July 24, 1580, he was acclaimed King of Portugal by the people of Santarém, and then in many cities and towns across the country. Assuming the title of Antonio I, he left for Lisbon, where he was received without great enthusiasm. The Spanish Third, which was military order known as the elite of Spanish troops, commanded by the third Duke of Alba, Fernando Pimentel, marched on the capital. Before entering Lisbon, the Duke imposed subjection on the Portuguese provinces to Philip II, and on August 25th, he fought at the Battle of Alcântara, defeating the force loyal to the Prior of Crato. Meanwhile, he allowed his soldiers to plunder the outskirts of the capital, where he seized immense treasure. This invasion led to Philip II of Spain being crowned as Philip I of Portugal in 1581, being recognized as king by the Cortes of Tomar, starting the Portuguese House of Habsburg, the so-called Philippine dynasty. The resistance led by Antonio retreated to the Azores, where he was still recognized as king and even minted currency. But on August 11, 1583, the new king was acclaimed in all the island's municipalities, thus ending almost 3 years of resistance. With this oath, the short reign of Antonio III also officially ended, and he was forced into exile. After his coronation, Philip left for Madrid and decided to appoint his nephew, Cardinal Alberto de Austria, as Viceroy of Portugal based in Lisbon. And due to the complexity of Iberian governance, the Spanish monarch needed some auxiliary bodies, such as councils, dedicated to advice and problem-solving, and subject to the knowledge and dictum of the monarch. Between many councils at the time, there was the Council of Portugal, created and made up of a president and 6, later 4, councillors. Its function consisted of representing the courts of the Crown of Portugal before the king, for matters that depended on the cuts, grace, and finally, the economy of Portuguese royal rule. Any decision by the king regarding the kingdom had to be consulted by the council before being transmitted to the Lisbon Chancellery and the courts concerned. But this left administration of Portugal and its empire largely to the Portuguese, simply under the supervision of Madrid. The revolt arose 60 years later, after Philip III's death, and with the succession by Philip IV, who took a different approach to Portuguese issues. Attempting to make Portugal a royal province, the tax was increased, mainly affecting Portuguese traders. The Portuguese nobility began to lose its importance in the Spanish courts, and government positions in Portugal were occupied by the Spanish, making the Portuguese nobles lose all its power. Several other problems undermined Portuguese support for union with Spain. One was pressure, especially from the Count Duke of Olivares, the Prime Minister of Spain, who attempted to centralize power and increase war taxes, making Portugal share the financial and military burden of Spain's wars. The Portuguese were disinclined to help, since Spain had been unable to prevent the Dutch occupation of several of its colonial possessions, despite the fact that both the Portuguese and Dutch were nominally under the same crown. The situation culminated in a revolution carried out by the nobility and high bourgeoisie on December 1, 1640. The revolution, although predictable, was triggered when João, 8th Duke of Bragança, was summoned to organize troops and fight against Catalan rebels in the War of the Moors, in that Catalonia fought for independence from Castile, with the support of the Kingdom of France, to which João refused to help. Cardinal Richelieu, Prime Minister of Louis XIII of France, supported the Duke and the Portuguese conspiracy through agents in Lisbon. And the time was just right, as Castilian troops were occupied on the other side of the peninsula, and Philip's troops fighting in the 30 Years' War. Antão Vaz de Almada, Miguel Almeida, and João Pinto Ribeiro, together with several associates of the 40 Conjurados, or conjurers, invaded the Paço da Ribeira, where the Vice Queen of Portugal, the Duchess of Mantua, and her General Secretary Miguel de Vasconcelos were present. Faced with the invasion, the Duchess of Mantua hid in a closet, to which was later arrested, and Miguel de Vasconcelos was thrown out the window, which caused his death, and they proclaimed King João IV, Duke of Bragança, descendant of João I, shouting, "Freedom!" The people and the entire Portuguese nation immediately rushed to support the revolution, restoration of independence, and thus, Felipe III of Portugal, IV of Spain, who was already struggling with a revolution in Catalonia, was unable to immediately resume power in Portugal. As soon João was acclaimed King of Portugal, beginning the Bragança dynasty, he sent a letter on December 2, 1640, to the Municipal Council of Évora as sovereign of the country. The subsequent Portuguese Restoration War against Philip IV of Spain consisted mainly of skirmishes near the border, the most important battles being the Battle of Montijo, Battle of the Lines of Elvas, Battle of Ameixial, Battle of Castelo Rodrigo, as well as the Battle of Montes Claros, in which all of them the Portuguese emerged victorious, making these victories possible due to several decisions by João IV to strengthen his forces. He created the War Council to organize all operations, then created the Junta das Fronteiras to take care of the border fortresses, the hypothetical defense of Lisbon, and the garrisons and seaports, having instituted an income to ensure improvements in all fortresses paid with regional taxes, thus making Portugal a country-sized fortress to ensure Portugal's independence. Meanwhile, the best Spanish forces were occupied in battles against the French in Catalonia, the Pyrenees, Italy, and the Low Countries. Spanish forces in Portugal never received adequate support. Looking for partners in the fight against Spain, João IV developed intense diplomatic activity, sending ambassadors to France, England, and the Dutch Republic. In 1641, he signed the Treaty of The Hague with the Dutch, a truce, since the Portuguese ports had been prohibited to trade with the Dutch during the Spanish rule. Focused on re-establishing relations with England, made difficult by the English Civil War where it took sides for the royal cause, Portugal negotiated the Treaty of Westminster in 1654 with Oliver Cromwell. But after the death of João IV in 1656, the widow Luísa de Gusmão renegotiated the treaty and sealed it by marrying her daughter Catarina de Bragança to Carlos II from England in 1662, and peace with the Dutch would only come in 1663, after a second Treaty of The Hague. However, Philip IV did not want to give up what he considered to be his rightful inheritance. When the war with France ended in 1659, the Portuguese army was well established and ready to face the attempt to regain control by the worn-out Spanish regime. Peace between Spain and Portugal was finally achieved in 1668 under the regency of Pedro de Bragança, after the reluctant Philip IV of Spain died and won the Battle of Montes Claros in 1665. It was sealed by the Treaty of Lisbon between Afonso VI of Portugal and Carlos II of Spain, putting an end to almost 30 years of Restoration War. Spain recognized Portugal's independence, and prisoners and conquests were returned, with the exception of the city of Ceuta, to which remained in Spain's possession. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Stay curious, stay knowledgeable,